Greetings, magical mavens. It's been a little while since I've done a little candid morning ritual garden chat with you guys. There's something about learning along with you guys about something as hands-on as gardening, and also talking about it to you guys as I'm learning it, and also having recorded that so I can watch it back in future years is also just going to help me learn as well. So I am looking into lunar gardening. For several years now I've said I wanted to get into it, and I would get like maybe just into the tip of the iceberg of it. Life would get busy, and ultimately I would, for the most part, just end up planting when I had time or in alignment with a very general understanding of the moon gardening system. But today I woke up and I was like, you know what? Let me take full notes on absolutely everything I can find on this, or at least a much deeper layer into it. So I'm going to regurgitate to you what I learned. I have no idea if this is going to work, but some people have actually shown results and think that it makes a huge difference. Some people don't think it does, and I want to find out for myself. So first things first, we're getting started a little bit late because with eclipse season and all of the retrogrades that were happening during it, a lot of family stuff came up for me. And so I'm getting started late, but that's okay. Another thing to quickly note is that I'm going to kind of do this my way, in the sense that when I start seeds, I typically just start all of my seeds in whatever the earliest like spring month is that I'm feeling up to it. Sometimes that's February, sometimes it's March. Unfortunately, this year it is April. However, the Farmer's Almanac website provides a calendar based on your zip code that kind of plugs some of this information in without necessarily explaining how it works, which is why I decided to do mine myself, because I genuinely want to understand how it works and be able to calculate it myself when needed. But their calendar is a little bit different. It doesn't just say, oh, so you want to plant in April, here are the days for April. It kind of tells you, based on which plant you are planting, what month and which days of that month you should plant. And for me right now, that is a little bit too complicated, because a lot of them were mentioned in February or March, which obviously is behind us. And I just kind of wanted to start from scratch, understanding how the lunar system works, and then applying it to whatever month I'm currently in, because realistically, that's probably what's going to happen most years anyway, right? First things first, I started by just wanting to remember the basics of which moon phase to plant which things. So when I first learned about this, I think somebody simply said to always start your seeds around the new moon, because, you know, with anything we know about moon phases, the new moon is typically when we set intentions. For example, just finished setting my intentions for myself for this month. And so that was kind of what I've been doing for a few years now, whenever possible. But apparently there's more to it than that. So technically, the new moon / week 1, which is the new moon through the day before the first quarter, you're supposed to plant not just above ground crops, but specifically leafy crops. And then for the second half of the waning phase of the moon, which is starting on the first quarter and ending right before the full moon, you're technically supposed to go for your fruiting crops. I would venture to say that I've probably heard people generalize this to, for the entire waxing part, you want to plant your above ground crops. And I think this is actually what I tried to do last year, to take it a little step further, as opposed to just planting everything around the new moon. Then with the full moon, after the moon reaches its peak, you're supposed to start planting root crops. So this was one that was a new onion layer for me last year that I tried. And honestly, I can't give you guys a clear understanding of my results, because things were just very chaotic last year. And ultimately, due to other circumstances, I ended up kind of starting seeds a lot of different times, starting and restarting, because I had pest issues and things like that. And sometimes it got to a point where I just went for it whenever I could. So I don't know. We're going to try to keep better track this year. And finally, week 4, which is basically the final quarter into the dark moon. You just don't really want to be planting anything because this is a time when things are reducing. So you want to be doing things like removing weeds and pests, or just whatever other gardening tasks you need to keep up with. So just with that knowledge to start with, I'm actually kind of lucky because today is the 1st, and that means that we're just a few days after the new moon. Like I said, life got crazy for me and I ended up traveling for a funeral this past weekend. So I am getting to setting my new moon intentions that were supposed to be done on March 29th, done on the 1st. And sometimes that's okay. You just got to do what you got to do. Get in there as soon as possible. And in this case for gardening, it looks like that's going to be okay due to a few reasons that I'll get to, but one of which is simply that we're still in the middle of week 1. So I can definitely go ahead and still plant my leafy crops. The next layer of this that I'm learning about is the actual astrological signs. And I think now is a good time for me to finally get into this layer because after a few years now of, like I said, working with lunar astrology in other areas of my life and practice, now I have a good enough basic understanding of how lunar astrology works in general. And so it's going to be a lot easier for me to go ahead and now apply it to what I'm learning about gardening. So that being said, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, or like woo-woo as some people might say. And it's because obviously astrology is a more woo-woo level for, your average person, as opposed to simply understanding how tides work with the moon. So I watched one video where they explained it in a kind of very simple way, which is if the moon is in a water sign, then that is one of the most fertile signs, and that's going to be one of your better days to plant. So layer 1 is this. Layer 2 is then also looking at the calendar and seeing, okay, so I want to plant my leafy crops. Is there a water moon taking place in week 1? So in my case, technically, yes, there is. I would have to wait until the last day of week 1 and actually kind of later in the day of week 1. So technically that would be the most fertile day for me to plant this week. However, it's not just as simple as is it in a water sign, because that was all that particular video, the first video that I watched today, went into. But I thought I would also take a closer look at what the guy was showing on his moon calendar. And even though he was saying to focus on the water days, it also showed that a day that the moon was in Taurus would be considered a good fertile day. So I was like, okay, well, he's not talking about that. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper and understand why it's saying that. So I watched some more videos and did some more reading. And as it turns out, and I kind of remembered this book that I have that I've been like kind of leafing through for the past few years now by Dorothy Morrison, she does quickly mention lunar gardening, and she mentions the days. Now, I remembered reading this a few years ago and thinking it was kind of bizarre, because the water thing makes sense. It's like, okay, we know that water is a nurturing, feminine element. It makes sense, and especially knowing what we know about the moon and the tides, sure, we can extend our imagination and imagine that days that the moon is in a water sign would be more fertile. Taurus, another one that we know of as a fertile sign. It's an earth sign, but it's the fixed earth, meaning that it's probably the most fertile. But why is it that there's also just other ones that don't seem to make sense? So for example, Dorothy Morrison says that the fruitful signs are Cancer, which is a water sign, Scorpio, which is a water sign, Taurus, which is an earth sign that's considered very fertile, and Pisces. But why is she also mentioning Sagittarius? Sagittarius is a fire sign, which is a masculine sign, not necessarily something you would consider fertile in the traditional sense. But this is where I ended up doing some additional research. I ended up watching a video on Appalachian tradition where they talk about the zodiac signs in alignment with what part of the body they rule over. Now, this is getting out of my wheelhouse because I almost never think about body astrology in my practice. I haven't really felt like I've had a reason to. I haven't really gotten there. But here we go. So apparently the explanation of whether a sign will be fertile or not is based not just around the sign's element, although in this Appalachian tradition, water is always fertile as well. But apparently it's based on something to do with like, I don't know if they're kind of overlaying the human body to like the earth or the growing process or something like that. But they're saying that when it is in the head, it is barren. Maybe because like mental energy is barren compared to like physical energy. I don't know. Taurus is considered in the neck, and that's considered fertile. So like, I don't even really understand why the neck and Taurus go together, but they do. And some people say that while it is generally considered fertile, it's specifically fertile for roots, which again doesn't make sense because why would the neck and roots go together? I don't know. Gemini is considered barren. However, some people do have success planting roots and vines because it's considered the arms, and I guess arms and beans and vines are all like arm-like. I don't know. Cancer is a water sign. It corresponds to the breast, and breast is the best. So that does make sense. Obviously the breast is, like think of breastfeeding, the archetype of the mother for Cancer, things like that. That absolutely makes sense. Leo is considered barren, even though it's the heart. Virgo is considered barren, even though it's the belly, and an earth sign, right? So that's a little bit confusing. Libra is considered barren except for flowers and vines. And it's considered, the body part is called the reins, which I don't even know what that means. That might be some old English terminology that I need to look up. Scorpio is the secrets, which you can guess what that means. It kind of overlays to the sacral chakra area, we'll say. And that is considered the second best after Cancer, the breast. So that makes sense too, because fertility, we're talking about the fertility parts of the body there, and it's a water sign. Sagittarius is considered the thighs, and while it's generally considered barren, Dorothy Morrison disagrees with that. While it's generally considered barren, some people say that it's a good time to plant onions. And that's another thing that even folks in some of these videos and things have mentioned, which, by the way, I've read quite a few Dorothy Morrison books. She was one of my first witchy authors back in the day. And one thing that I don't love about her is that she doesn't typically explain why. And I am one of those people, as you can see, I want to know all of the whys, okay? But folks in the videos were typically saying that this is one of those things that like everybody's old Appalachian grandparent or whatever is going to have a few discrepancies with each other. So, I guess Dorothy Morrison's sources tell her that Sagittarius is considered fruitful, even though most people consider it barren or just for planting onions. I'm probably just going to avoid that one for now, to be honest, because it's complicated and unnecessary right now. Capricorn is an earth sign that I would consider to be fruitful. However, it corresponds to the knees and is considered either barren or only suitable for planting potatoes. Aquarius is considered the legs, and it's considered barren. In my mind, I would say, okay, well, if it's the legs, wouldn't that be like a time to plant something that you want to have a strong stem, like sunflowers maybe? I don't know. I'm not probably going to mess with it this year because I'm just getting used to the basics, but like in the future, that might be something that I would experiment with. And finally, Pisces, water sign, considered fertile. It's also supposed to go along with the feet, and therefore root vegetables are supposed to be a good thing to plant. So I've gone ahead and I've created a calendar for April. This is when I'm going to be trying to do all of my planting, and I'm just going to take a look at this to see when would be the best days to plant what. So I've gone ahead and color coded week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4 along with this. So thankfully, as it just so happens, we are in week 1 at the beginning of the month, which is perfect. Week 2 will be coming up starting this weekend. So I'll have plenty of time to go ahead and get my above ground things going. And then the third week of the month is week 3, which is when I'll get my roots in for the most part. And then definitely this week would be some garden work that needs to get done because I have done absolutely nothing outside except for turn the compost a few times. And then if anything needs to be redone, at the end of the month, we do have some more week 1 days. So there we go. Now, I'm taking a closer look at this, And I'm just trying to make sure that I can visually understand it because I'm a visual learner. So in addition to going ahead and color coding the weeks, I have also used blue to represent what's considered a fertile sign. The general understanding, it seems, among most people is that the best ones to go with are the water signs and Taurus. So that is what I'm going to stick with for the sake of simplicity, and that does, in my mind, with my knowledge of astrology and elements, make decent enough sense. So technically today, if I wanted to plant something, again, we are in week 1, so that's good. But we're also in Taurus, which is not a water sign. However, it is considered fertile, specifically for, they said, roots. But here's where it gets interesting. Week 1 is not supposed to be for roots. Week 3 is supposed to be for roots. So would I plant roots today, even though like it's considered a fertile time and it's considered good for roots, but it's not the 3rd week? I don't know. I think that this year, try it as simple as possible. So I think I'm going to try and stick mainly to this and to is it a fertile day or not. So those will be my only 2 criteria. What week is it? Does that work with what I'm trying to plant? And is it a fertile day? So I'm going to actually skip the idea of this being Taurus to plant roots today. And I'm just going to focus the next day or 2 on the leafy crops only. And then come the weekend, I'm going to get into fruiting and then roots next week. So taking a closer look at these, her system is a little bit different. So her moon phases are identical to what folks that I came across online said. However, when she talks about using the signs, she has them a little bit different. So her overall fertile signs are somewhat consistent, except that it includes Sagittarius randomly. But then she also talks about neutral signs, which I have not seen anyone else mention this so far. She says this is where these signs carry a more subtle vibration but are still beneficial for all plants. I like to use their energies when working with leafy herbs. So she was saying the particularly fertile ones are good for things that form like fruits and seeds and things like that above ground. But the neutral signs are apparently okay for leafy herbs, which are Libra, Capricorn, and Aquarius. So this brings in some earth element and some air element. So, I mean, in my mind, that kind of makes sense, but it also just seems complicated compared to anything else that I'm coming across online. And she does not, like I said, provide an explanation as to why she believes that, which would be helpful. And then finally, she says that the barren signs are Aries, Gemini, Leo, and Virgo, which I could see, again, Aries and Gemini. Yeah, I could see those definitely because they're considered masculine, airy, fiery type signs. But then there's Virgo in there. So I think that someone mentioned in a video that the reason why Virgo is not considered fertile is because since it's technically the like sign that represents the harvest, it's more so about pulling things up as opposed to planting things into the ground. So I guess that can make sense too. So much like that 4th week of the moon phase, she's saying that during Aries, Gemini, Leo, or Virgo, those are also potentially good times to weed things, cut things back, and I'm guessing probably also harvest things maybe. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I also took down a note where someone recommended pruning times. So if you are pruning because you want something to grow back stronger, like the way I tend to cut my like mint plants and lemon balm and stuff like that, where I'm trying to harvest as much as possible, but in a way that a lot more will grow back and it'll be much more bushy growth. You want to do that during a waxing moon. While it does make sense, to me it was kind of counterintuitive because I think I was always told that you should only ever cut plants like when it's waning or like closer to a new moon, because that's when it's less cumbersome to the plant because like a lot of its life force has been retreated into the root. But I guess this is just another way of looking at it where if it's already doing a lot of outward growth, that would also be a good time to cut it because it'll still have time during that week to continue doing more outward growth even after it's been cut. And then it's saying that if you're pruning something back because you want to reduce it, make it smaller, get rid of it, etc., then you want to do that during the waning moon. So it does make sense logistically, but I've just heard it looked at in other ways too. So this is kind of all over the place, isn't it? Yeah, funnily enough, the way I got down that massive rabbit hole, or carrot hole, as I actually heard someone mention, is because I was doing my own regular moon journaling today. So I realized I had missed the prompt on the 29th. I was going to go ahead and catch up with it today. It's a new moon. This one happens to be an eclipse. And I am someone who is not morally opposed to setting intentions during an eclipse as long as it's done mindfully and with awareness that things might not go according to plan. And so I was just talking about how overall I think things in my life are going great. There have definitely been some serious eclipse / Mercury retrograde and Venus retrograde madness that has gone on in the past couple of weeks. And so because of that, I do feel like I'm just a little bit behind in my projects. And so I was talking about how one thing that I definitely want to do this week is get my seeds started. And then I started to write down something about the moon phase that I was going to get started with planting. And then I realized I might not even be doing it correctly. So I was like, let me go ahead and quickly review which phases of the moon to work with. And then that turned into a whole ass rabbit hole. And I never even finished the final sentence of my prompt. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. But yeah, if you are interested in journaling along with me, we do this in my Patreon community, the one that is associated with my old podcast channel. We are still very active with our journal prompts and our seasonal challenges and everything that we've always been doing in the Patreon. And so I will leave the link of where you can go ahead and get this journal prompt and all of my other ones. Anyway, that was a long ramble. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I feel like it's warranted. I hope you guys are enjoying the video so far, and let's get back into the other content.